Bruce and I couldn't have children, and we tried a lot of different things. And then it was just like, okay, the writing's on the wall. So we're just going to be us, and we're satisfied with that. We're going to be happy with that. And then just a friend of a friend said, hey, there's these two little girls that are, like, they don't really have a home, and the guardians are looking for somewhere for them to go. And I just thought, yeah, I'm not doing wild goose chases. I'm not doing the whole, I mean, it's a little bit like diabetes when you have infertility. Everybody gives you medical advice that they saw on TV, right?
Right.
And you're just like, "Okay, that's not my body. Thanks. I'm glad that worked for some celebrity doctor who's telling people to do this, but that's not my body for diabetes." And the same with infertility. It's like, "Oh, if you eat persimmons, then you're going to get pregnant." And it was just like, "Well, I don't know about that." So, so I wasn't going to go on a wild goose chase at all, but I just thought, I'm going to go be of service. I'm going to do some grocery shopping. I'll do some dishes. I'll make some meals, I'll clean the house, and I'll call it good. And the situation was very different. And so at the end of the day, I brought the girls home with me.
Welcome to the Sendy Mom podcast. I am really excited to be here talking to my good friend, Sherrie Gavin. And we have been friends for a long time. It's probably been like 15 years or something. This was
Yeah, yeah.
back back when we lived in Australia for a few years, and Sherrie was over there. She's married to an Aussie and has a couple Aussie daughters that we're going to hopefully get to talk about soon. And I'll just explain and tell you a little bit of her background. So she is PhD candidate at the University of New England, Australia, and she earned her undergraduate from SUU, Southern Utah University, as a member of the Phi Alpha Theta History Honor Society. Her work can be found in the Journal of Mormon History, Meridian Magazine, and The Friend, and many more. She has a book called Baptisms and Boomerangs that I own and that I have read with all of my kids. And that's also available at Cedar Fort Press. And she has a memoir titled Turning Pink that I want to talk to you about because I didn't know about this. And I guess it's going to be released by BCC Press in April 2025. She and her spouse, Bruce, are the parents of the loves of their life. I love that. Cheyenne and Elizabeth, who I love dearly too and think they're wonderful. So I am really excited to talk to you today about your life and your story and the kinds of things that you have done that have been Sendy. And
Awesome.
yeah. So let's start out just by finding out, what do you think it means to be a Sendy mom?
I think it means just taking hold of every opportunity. So, and you asked me before what one of my favorite quotes are, and I've got a lot of favorite quotes. But Camilla Kimball once said, "Make the most of every opportunity," right? And so sometimes the opportunity is not something that is good for you to do. So I don't think it's just every opportunity. I think we still have to be reasonable, and I don't think she meant to throw caution to the wind. But I think they really do only come once, and I think we do need to grab hold of them. And I think being a Sunday mom is recognizing that spark of something happening and chasing after it. And it might be a service opportunity, it might be just a small good deed, and it might be, hey, I feel really passionate about this project. I think I'm going to write an essay and see if I can get it published. I mean, or it might be, hey, everybody's going hiking this weekend. I think, and it's a cliff that you're like, oh, I don't know, can I think that's it. I think opportunities do come our ways, and I think recognizing it and running with it is a Sendy thing to do.
For sure. Yeah, just jumping into it when the recognizing the opportunities and taking a hold of them. Sometimes I find that the most difficult thing for me is picking which Sendy opportunity to take hold of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's and that you know and that's we're all at a different point in our journey of choosing what we're doing or going for it, or um, rejoicing in what we've done and recycling and doing
Yeah.
other things, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and one of my favorite things about talking to people about their Sendy lives is finding out how that journey has taken its course, what that story has been like for them. So I'm super excited to kind of find out what your journey has been and what your story has been. I've been a part of it, but I don't know all of it, and I know we don't even have enough time for you to share all of it, but I'm excited to hear some of your Sendy story. So, why don't you just give me a little bit of background? Tell me about who you are and about your family
Hmm.
and all those things.
Okay. Well, I grew up actually in upstate New York. And with that, I love the diversity. And I think that really gave me a beautiful curiosity for people being different, you know. The way people make spaghetti, everybody does it differently, you know. It's
Mhm.
just, and the world is really your oyster, and discovering who people are and how they got there. It's kind of just fun. So, and I think it's a sense of adventure to see just how other people live, and I think it's a beautiful adventure. So I'm grateful for that. So, and you know, my parents, especially my mother, was very cautious. So with that, I learned to be mindful and careful, you know, and I think everybody is going to say a lot of that about their moms. And it wasn't that my mother said, don't do that. My mother said, think it through before you do it, you know, look both ways before you cross the street. And I think that's a really important thing, is that it's not about hiding inside. It's about figuring out, making a plan, and achieving that plan. So she was very good at teaching us to plan and put those things in order. So but I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes when I like being dramatic and saying 1 year old. So
Wow.
I spent my second birthday in the hospital being diagnosed. So I'm like, oh well, I was there when I was one. So
Yeah.
so I don't know
Wow.
what it's like to not be a diabetic, you know.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
um, but with that, you know, there's certain realities with that. One is that there was a lot of times when my blood sugar dipped so low that it was like, well, it was the hospital, and even then it was like there, you know, I
Pretty
wasn't maybe good.
scary.
Yeah, it was close
Hmm.
to death. Death was not impossible, and it isn't
Right.
for anybody, but it would just seemed a little bit more on the forefront probably for me growing up. But with that, I learned early on to recognize that some opportunities were going to be out of reach. And whether it would be because my blood sugar was dipping low, or because, you know, I'm not allowed to be a pilot because nobody wants to be in an airplane with someone who might be passing out because they didn't get a Snickers bar, you know. You know, so I'm not going to
Right.
be a pilot. But
Yeah.
with that, you learn your limitations, but I think that's smart. I think when
Sure.
we embrace that, rather than looking at that as a prison, but rather looking at that as a mode for freedom, we know what our limitations are.
It
We can
right.
then run in all the other directions.
Well, and
So
honestly, I think that's important that we have like a focus that, well, like what I was saying before is that, sometimes there's too many options and too many
yeah,
opportunities. So it kind of helped you maybe to focus in on some things that you could do. And that's what we really want to do. We want to look at what you can do. Sometimes you have these things thrust upon you, and then you just choose how you're going to respond to those sorts of things.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then I think one of the things my dad used to tell me all the time was, you're just going to have to work harder than everybody else. And that's okay. Hard work is good. You
Yeah.
know, and what a grateful thing. Like, so a lot of times when I'd hit that barrier, whatever it was, you know, academic, financial, just, you know, climbing that mountaintop or whatever it was like, okay, everybody who's gone before me is making this look really easy. And
Right.
I am just going to have to own that I'm going to work harder, and I'm okay to be the one who works harder, and I will set an example for the slow people working harder and
Well,
I'll
and
do it.
honestly, comparison is the thief of joy,
It
right?
really
So,
is.
mhm,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
So, but I've also really learned with that the privilege of life, because I mean, there are kids who I went to diabetic camp with, that sounds so corny, diabetic camp, but
Mm,
that haven't had healthy, full lives. And so I've really had a privilege of dedicated parents who taught me how to really look after myself, and the privilege of always living in a place where I could get insulin. And it sounds,
yeah.
even when I was little, I first started testing. I used to test my urine, and then we got
Uh-huh.
blood monitors where you poked your fingers, and now I've got this great, pod I wear. and
Right.
and so it's absolutely progressed since I was a kid. But I really hesitate to say, well, it's easier now, because everybody's body's different, everybody's mind's different. I'm not going to say that my life is harder or easier than anyone else, but I think having an attitude of gratitude sounds so
Mhm.
corny, but it's true. When you can be grateful for whatever is in your path. Even like for a while, I had to drop out of undergraduate school because I needed medical insurance.
Mhm.
I just needed medical insurance. I needed to get my medications, and at the time I was a little bit cranky that I had to work full time for medical insurance, but
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that because there are people who didn't have that opportunity and just didn't have medication, so I've got to
Right.
be grateful for medication, for science, and for
Mhm.
progression.
Well,
So,
yeah, and it sounds like it's given you a lot of freedom to be able to
yeah.
do more things. And you have, I mean, I'm always in awe of you, Sherrie, and all
Oh.
the things that you're putting yourself into, and especially within education. And I know that we're going to get a lot more into that. I'm actually interested though, about how you ended up in Australia. I don't remember talking
Oh.
about it before.
Oh, yeah, yeah, my husband loves this story. It's really funny. So his joke is that I'm the guest who never left. So, I I would never recommend this to a parent now, because as a parent, I'm like, this is crazy. Why? But anyway, because I was doing undergrad at SU, so for a time I would drive to Las Vegas, not too far away, and I would freelance write and cover trade shows and sell my pieces to different trade magazines.
Okay.
So driving back and forth to Vegas as, an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old, now I think, oh, that's not safe, but that's what I did.
Uh-huh.
So, and school did take me longer, so I was a little bit in my mid 20s when I did finally get through it, but that's one of the jobs that I kind of gave myself, and with that, I was able to score an internship to Australia. So, and the internship was in Melbourne, which is it's about a flight wise, maybe an hour and a half south of Sydney. And my supervisor just said, "Listen, you can't come all the way to Australia and not go to Sydney." And so I said,
Mhm.
"That's great, that's fine." But I travel smart, right? My mom's rules, right?
Right.
Mom's rules, dad's rules. So I said, but everywhere that I can tell is a safe neighborhood is way out of my budget. So and I'm a smart girl traveler, so I don't know that I can do that. And he said, "Don't you worry, you can go ahead, you can stay with this mate of mine. He's lived back with his folks for a little bit because he's going back to school. And so you can just go and stay with them. They've got a spare bedroom." And that was Bruce. So
Wow, I love
so
that.
I
Yeah.
joke that I'm a mail order bride, and he jokes that I'm the guest that never went home.
Oh my goodness, that's so fabulous. I love it. And so boy, that is actually a beautiful like romance, a
Yeah.
beautiful love story. History has been a big part of your life, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting how there are certain things that are part of kind of your being, right?
Yeah.
And they become your passion and the thing that you love most of all. So can you think of what inspired you in the beginning to pursue history and be interested in that?
I think honestly, I just was always fascinated with the way people used to do things. And growing up in upstate New York, I mean, we were very close to where a lot of women's suffrage started for the US, and we're very close to where the American Revolutionary War took place. Um, and I was fascinated, I lived between Oneida and Genesee streets.
Okay.
And so those are Iroquois, also Haudenosaunee tribes, because I looked it up, right?
Okay.
And but we also lived close to Herkimer, which is named for General Herkimer in the Revolutionary War. There was the Erie Canal song. We went to the Erie Canal every year on field trips. So I think this fascination was probably due to my upbringing, the location of my upbringing. Um,
Mhm.
but then we travel, to visit my grandmother in Salt Lake, and we'd look at the pioneer history and what the pioneers did. And she was the daughter of Utah pioneers. And so I think that just always made me curious. Like
Okay.
how did we get here? Like it was always
Mhm.
my interest, my question of interest. How did we get here? Why are we doing this differently than we are doing that differently? It just so yeah,
Yeah.
that's always just been fascinating to me.
Yeah, let's talk about curiosity for a second because I think that a lot of times that is where joy comes from, is that curiosity of how did people do things before and how are we doing them now, and are is it really better, or was that a better way to live back then, and trying to understand people. And I guess that's sociology, within the history and everything, understanding people and why people do things, and that can be a real inspiration for us to make changes in our lives or to go back to roots and things that people have done before. And I know that's something that you have studied a lot about. I'm trying to remember, because did you do your master's in Australia, or your did you get your
I
doctorate in?
Yeah, lots of stuff. I stopped started the doctorate a few times in Australia, and it was partly because I was chasing my husband's career. So at first, I have brothers who are Eagle Scouts, and we always, did the American Scout thing, and then I went to Australia, and my husband is a Queen's Scout. So I always remembered Scouts kind of like ended at 18. If you didn't have your Eagle, you didn't get it. And these rules might not be correct. It's just based on my memory. But Bruce had a scout group that went well into his 20s. So I started to do my original postgraduate work in the history of the Boy Scouts in Australia, because I was just curious as to how we got there. And with that, it was so eye-opening. I didn't realize that it actually started out of the UK. I didn't know that,
Okay.
and so
Mhm.
I absolutely loved studying all of that. And because Australia operated a lot like separate colonies, and for a long time, I mean, not until 1901, it was finally a federated country. But so, and even then, for decades afterwards, they were still independently operated in their states.
Okay.
So there's a very fascinating history. And because I'd been raised with scouting in my siblings, I was curious as to the differences there and just wanted to see how it was different and how it was the same. Because I think that's a part of it. I think when you deconstruct things, you also find similarities, and I think that's a way that we can seek for relationships and seek for building and bonding, and
Right.
and develop further good from that. So,
Okay,
um,
so since you kind of studied a little bit about the Scouts, let's go there for just a second. I mean,
yeah.
the Scouts is not a hugely popular program anymore. What are some of the good things that you can see that from that would help parents to raise children that were a little bit more of risk takers and a little more courageous?
I don't even know that I would say that. I think it's a great way for shy kids to get out and do something different. because I think when you're shy, you tend, I mean, nowadays especially, kids just get on their devices and just almost shut down to the rest of the outside world. And I think, I mean, we've all done that, you know, a part of it is a, you know, sort of mental health break from reality or whatever. But I think with scouting, I think it can turn anyone into an adventure. And I think there is something to be said about communing with nature and being outside and hiking and looking at a high horizon that you've had to hike 3 hours to get to or more, and
Mhm.
actually just going, I think there's an adrenaline rush that comes from that. And you just go, yeah, this was really worth it because of who I became in the process. Even it was, you know, a short half-hour hike or something like that. Sometimes the not having all the devices and not having, you know, the naysayers around you or whatever, and just having that peace and commune time is, it can be a type of meditation. I know a lot of people meditate with it, but I also think that the unity side of Scouts is a really, positive quality. You know,
Mhm.
there's no one's left behind. There's partnership in it. Everybody's got a buddy. You work together. You still the integrity of staying there when someone's still left behind or going slower than you are. There's an inclusivity that is, I think it's powerful,
Yeah.
and
No, it's the
important.
community, and that,
Mm,
and honestly, as long as they're teaching good values, putting your children in anything can be helpful. So often we're so afraid to, expose them because we're worried they're going to learn, something wrong, or, that somebody else is going to have a little bit of control over their learning. That's kind of important. We have to start taking the scaffolding off at some point. And so the scouting program, I feel like, is a great place, to do that. Usually, it
yeah.
depends obviously on the kinds of leaders that you have. And so you do want to vet that a little bit, because we take calculated risks, and in
Yep.
doing that, we research a little bit more about what that person, the leadership, and also the tenets of that, organization, and whether that fits with your values and what you believe in. And so I think, no, that was really good discussion about the Boy Scouts that
Yeah.
I had no idea that you had kind of worked on that. So I remember you were working also on the Relief Society in Australia.
Oh, yes. Yes. So I've done, well, I did an article, the Journal of Mormon History, on the first Stake Relief Society presidents. So I did some work on the Relief Society. So the first Relief Society was organized in Brisbane, and a few things like that. But I also just enjoyed that history, you know, because a lot of it was, uh, I mean, it had been around since the church. Well, not since the church had been introduced. I think the late 19th century, like I want to say 1898, is when the first Relief Society was there. But I think when you look at the war years, I think that's really I think that's informative of people and background, and the reason we do things, and the reason we have certain celebrations, and the culture of it as well. And a lot of that is absolutely, maintained, and because it was reliant upon women, because the men were off to war,
Mhm.
and then the women were often widowed. And so how did the women support each other? So I think there's a beautiful unity in that as well. Um,
Mhm.
that is an empathetic sort of, place to be in. And I think sitting with that empathy and seeing what wisdom is arisen from that empathy is important. So I
Mhm.
looked at that a little bit, and I was just, really lucky to have lived only a couple blocks away from the first Stake Relief Society president. And I thought I was doing a service by visiting her, and then it was like, oh, you're it was so the other way around. I was just absolutely so blessed by my relationship with her that,
Yeah.
and she was in her 90s when she passed away, but I was devastated. I was like, my friend died. It just really,
Oh,
but she
who
was in her
was it?
90s.
Who
Eth
who was that?
Ethel Nash Parton.
Maybe you can kind of explain what the Relief Society is for people who don't understand.
Okay, so the Relief Society, so as a historian, I like sticking at the history of it. So it was an organization that was started, years ago, early days of the church. It was the women banding together to support each other and to support their community. So they were sewing curtains, they were sewing shirts for men who needed shirts. They also looked after the women who were widows. They were looking after families who were in want or need. And it was just women binding together. And for a time, the Relief Society did close down. It used to be totally run by women, but it's because the men call the leaders, it's the men lead them. It used to be 100% women run. Women nominated each other for president. Women elected the presidency, and it was 100% women run and organized, and they raised all their own funds and everything like that. But now it really is a men's organization for women. So I struggle with it now a little bit, but that's because I also fantasize about the fast and how we're past and why it was so much more romantic then. And
Yeah. No, and no, I think that's fine to talk about it, but really it's an organization for women to come together and to counsel together and to minister to each other,
mm,
right?
yep.
And that I mean that's from the founding.
Hmm.
That's what it was meant to be. And I remember hearing somebody talking about the early Relief Society, how they would come to their meetings and everybody was expected to get up and tell what they did that week to minister to others. And if you were like, yeah, I just didn't have a lot of time. I had, this going on, that going on. You were invited to leave. So it was really
Yeah.
supposed to be something where people were working, were doing something, right?
Yeah, it wasn't an everybody in it club. It was a you had to work to join. You had to be ask someone to nominate you to be even let in. It was kind of like a sorority, really. So,
Right.
but a sorority of really good service, which is fantastic. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Well, that's
Mm.
wonderful. All right. So our Sendy Spotlight this week is on Camilla Irene Kimball. She said, make the most of every opportunity. I love this so much because this is so much of what Sendy Mom is about. It's about looking for those opportunities and making them work for you. So Camilla Kimball was the wife of Spencer W. Kimball, who was the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1973 until his death in 1985. So from the time they were married, Camilla had to share her husband with others who demanded his attention, and he had a lot of church leadership positions. When her husband became the president of the church, she knew more was going to be required of her, and this produced a lot of anxiety for her. She embraced those responsibilities because she is a very Sendy woman. She knew that by supporting her husband and the millions of people they would be speaking to, she would be bringing more light into the world. And so she did it. As a young adult, she was the first of her large family to leave and pursue her education. She had an insatiable desire for knowledge and to learn. Once she secured a position as a teacher, she used part of her earnings to support her siblings in their education. So Spencer and Camilla's marriage was built on love and economy. They lived through the Depression and learned to be really frugal. They enjoyed traveling and dancing. Even though they did not have much money, they were still able to travel, staying in inexpensive hotels and bringing their own food with them. They also were part of a square dancing club. What a fun, Sunday thing to do. So there you go. Camilla treated everyone with respect and love and let them know that they had worth. She never believed herself to be better or worse than anyone else. Once, when she was traveling with her husband, she noticed a custodian diligently cleaning, and Camilla walked up to her and complimented her work, letting her know that she was appreciated and that her work was recognized and was important. To her, every role mattered. So I don't really know everything, and I am certainly not an expert at any of the things I talk about on this podcast. I think I know how the world works, but this is really based on my experiences. This is why I am really curious about how other people think the world works. Understanding other perspectives causes me to either change my opinion or to deepen my understanding or just to understand the other person a little bit better. I love the growth that just takes place with all of this learning. I think it's kind of sendy to open yourself up to new ideas. That's why I'm really passionate about getting to know other people and learning from them. I was talking to Sherrie about Sendy things, and she asked me what I thought she should try next. She said she's planning a trip to Machu Picchu next year, and so I challenged her to make a new friend there. I think one of the things that Camilla embodied was a real vision of each person as someone worth knowing. Everyone has a story to tell and everyone has value. Sometimes people just need to be noticed. So make a new friend. I'm actually really a pretty shy person. I really struggled making friends when I was a kid. And I remember when I was young, walking around the playground by myself with my hood covering my face so I didn't have to talk to anyone. Making friends really makes you pretty vulnerable, but things that are hard are often the things that are going to be the most fulfilling. And I certainly have had some incredible relationships and friendships because I decided to just send it and make a new friend. So, my encouragement to you this week is to be Sendy by making a new friend. Why don't you take a picture of you and your friend and tag Sendy Mom on social media? Or better yet, send me a picture at becky@sendymom.com or at sendy.mom on Facebook or Instagram, and then get featured on my social media page. Now go find a friend and be Sendy. Well, I kind of wanted to segue just a little bit
Mhm.
into your girls. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about your girls and how you
Okay.
came about them.
Yeah. Well, that's just, yeah, that's a crazy story. So it was, so Bruce and I couldn't have children, and we tried a lot of different things. And then it was just like, okay, the writing's on the wall. So we're just going to be us, and we're satisfied with that. We're going to be happy with that. And then just a friend of a friend said, hey, there's these two little girls that are, like, they don't really have a home, and the guardians are looking for somewhere for them to go. And I just thought, yeah, I am not doing wild goose chases. I am not doing the whole, I mean, it's a little bit like diabetes when you have infertility. Everybody gives you medical advice that they saw on TV, right?
Right.
And you're just like, "Okay, that's not my body. Thanks. I'm glad that worked for some celebrity doctor who's telling people to do this, but that's not my body for diabetes." And the same with infertility. It's like, "Oh, if you eat persimmons, then you're going to get pregnant." And it was just like, "Well, I don't know about that." So, so I wasn't going to go on a wild goose chase at all, but I just thought, I'm going to go be of service. I'm going to do some grocery shopping. I'll do some dishes. I'll make some meals, I'll clean the house, and I'll call it good. And the situation was very different. And so at the end of the day, I brought the girls home with me. And then
Wow.
we went about we had to identify them. We didn't know their last names. And getting that, we needed to, like, we didn't have birth certificates, we didn't have passports. We just, and their parents were their birth parents were in a different situation. And so it was very challenging to communicate with them. So, but in finding and communicating with the birth mother, she was glorious. And she just, and I just said, we'd love to adopt your daughters if you're okay with that. And she said, yeah, she was really good. And in fact, I'm still in touch with her, and with Turning Pink coming out, because I'm really condensing a lot of drama, a
Yeah.
lot of drama that was involved in that. There's so much, and they were born in one country and ended up in Australia, and so we were trying to identify them in this other
Mm.
country, and then for us to passports issued for them, and then to get their visas issued because they were in an interesting visa situation. It was just, there was a lot going on. And then they had they had attachment issues, and they'd been given around, and they wanted to stay with us, and we wanted to keep them with all of our hearts. But it was challenging. It was a very challenging period. And some of it, you're actually mentioned in the book. So for
That's
your
crazy.
listeners, yeah, when the adoption was final. Oh, and I was saying about the birth mother, I just said, do you still feel at ease about this? Do you mind? And she just said, God's hand was in it. those girls were always meant to be yours. I
Hmm.
mean, and
It's
people don't know
amazing.
that about adoption. They really don't own how the birth mother is utterly inspired by God as well. Like there's just
Absolutely.
so much inspiration there. But yeah, so I'll quickly tell your audience. So yeah, when their adoption was final, they turned to us and, they'd been seeing cartoons and things. Happy endings always ended with weddings. And they said, "Great. Are we going to get married to you?" And I said, "Sure." So I asked Becky to marry us as a family, and she
That was one
performed.
of the best parts of my life. It's such a favorite memory.
Yeah, ours too, ours too. So we had an adoption wedding, and we, decided that we really wanted to be a family. It was done and done, but we did it for the girls and they just loved it. They
Yeah.
just loved it and we loved it too. And it was a beautiful experience to celebrate an adoption. So yeah,
Yeah.
so
That
Becky's
was fun.
available for adoption
That's
weddings, I'm
right.
sure.
There you go. I'll do some adoption weddings if you want them. But, I felt like it was just such a beautiful and commitment that those girls wanted to have with you. And I know they're teenagers now, and that's another story entirely. But
Yeah,
when it comes down to the core, they wanted to be committed to you and they wanted you to be committed to them. And that's what that was all about. And I loved that about,
yeah,
what you did. The whole thing of you just racing down to Sydney when you heard that there was somebody that needed help,
yeah,
not even realizing that this is how your life was going to change from that moment on. You were going to be a different person. And it's not like being pregnant for 9 months and anticipating and planning for that baby. It was like, I have two girls who have had some serious trauma in their life, and I am going to welcome them into my home and I'm going to be their mother.
yeah.
And that must have been a real challenge for you. Are there any tools that you've reflected on that kind of helped you through that period of time?
I honestly, yeah, I think some of my naivety was good. Um,
You
because I
don't know what
mean,
you don't know, and you just
exactly. You
go.
just sort of, yeah, because I tend to overthink things as well. So I think it was good that I didn't have that opportunity.
Right.
Um, but I just, yeah, when we got back, the first day we were back, and Bruce was working in Chile, and he flew all night, and I drove all night, and we met back, and we took the kids the next day shopping because they didn't have shoes, they didn't have underwear, they didn't have, their list of didn't haves was very large. And I just remembered walking into the store and thinking, I have never shopped in a little kids section of the store, or and so I thought, I have no idea what size these kids are, and didn't know how undersized they were. So I think if I'd known that, I might have been more, this isn't, something's
There's
wrong
something
here.
wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think it was good that I didn't know that they were so underdeveloped physically, and they also grew so fast because I just was like, well, they're just really
Feed them.
hungry. I just feed them, and well, it's because
Mm-hmm.
they probably weren't quite fed enough before. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, but then also the generosity of other mothers. I didn't know that that existed, and that is a beautiful world where you can turn to another mother and say, I have no idea what size shoes
Yeah.
to get and what I need. And those mothers and they could be strangers in grocery stores. And I know, like, I used to think it was really kind of weird when people would offer me food advice about diabetes, drove me bananas. But with kids, I'm like, oh my gosh, really? They like this? I'm getting it. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you. And so it's kind of funny, like this thing that used to drive me bananas, I was like suddenly so grateful for when it was
Yeah.
flipped in a different
Well,
situation.
yeah, and that's the thing is because you seek answers from experts when you don't have information. But if you're the one that's the expert and you're getting information from people who haven't really studied it out, I can see how that could be a little bit irritating. But then once you feel you've got that humility because you don't know anything, that's when we really embrace each other and try to get all the information. That's actually kind of an interesting thing maybe we could talk about a little bit is how to what is a good way, because we all want to be helpful, right? And
Yep.
generally, when people are giving you advice about things, it's because they're just trying to be helpful. Sometimes it is hard to know how to give advice, or if you should, or if you should just
Yeah.
wait for somebody to ask.
Yeah, it is so hard. And I think asking is also because we all have pride.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to say, and even in my situation, I didn't want to say, I'm totally stupid, but where do you buy sippy cups in a store? I had no idea. There's a level of pride there where you don't want to ask. And so sometimes you're not just dealing with your own desire to serve, but you might be dealing with the recipient's pride. So one of the things my mother used to do, and I used to think she was just weird, and because she was my mom, but she said, "How can we help you? How can I help you?"
Yeah.
She'd see a mother struggling with children and a stroller and all these, and trying to juggle all the stuff and groceries and stuff. And she'd say, "Okay, how can I help you?"
Mm.
And and then sometimes they would say, "Hey, just hold this," or can it, just because they're desperate and they're just all they want, just hold a kid, just hold my child, or to hold this bag or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's a pinch situation. Um, but and I also think so I think it depends on the situation. I think you kind of need to be paused and mindful about it.
And and sometimes you just want to know that people are there, and people.
So, but I've also heard of other people saying that at the time of an event, whether it be a death or something like that, there's a lot of people there. We're all mourning with you. We're celebrating. Then 6 months after, sometimes you're still processing, or maybe it just finally hits you, and you're like, "This is my new life," and that's the scary stage. So,
Right.
not that I time it, but I do try to be mindful if someone's lost someone. um, I try to be mindful on those 6 months later and just then communicate, "How are you doing? Can I take you out to lunch? Would you like to just go and have a chat?" And
Beautiful.
quite often people do respond to that. It's simple, it's
Hmm.
easy. They can talk about whatever they want, but they get out of the house. Maybe it changes the pace a little bit. So it's hard to just say, "Oh, just read the room," because I get it wrong a lot too. But I
Right.
think having your heart in the right place and kind of reaching out and saying, "We would desperately love to support you. What can we do?" You
And it's a lot harder to do with your children. I think,
Mhm.
children are often, they want to be trusted. They want to feel like my parents think that I can figure this out on my own. And so I think that at some point in your child's life, you have to get to a point where you say, I trust you, and you're going to be great, and you're the cheerleader. It's suddenly not the parent
Yeah.
anymore, but you are that cheerleader. And that there's a really gray area when that comes to pass. And so sometimes I have a difficult time, like as they're young adults, figuring out like, okay, so am I teaching you, or am I just congratulating you and sitting with you when you've made a mistake that I know that you probably could have avoided. If you would have listened to me, you probably would have
Yeah.
avoided this, but you messed up. And so do I say, well, gee, I told you that you shouldn't have done that? Or do you
Yeah.
say, that really sucks, I'm really
Yeah.
sorry that happened to you? And I think that's probably the better thing to say.
Yeah. I think too, for me, it has to, and I'm learning this now, so I'm in by no means any kind of professional with it, but I like saying, "Okay, do I trust myself as a parent that I've taught them well?" And if
Yeah.
I can answer that question with yes, I've tried really hard and I've taught them these values, I've taught them these skills, and maybe they're going to test those things, but
Mhm.
that's okay because I needed to test my mother's advice, my father's advice, and my teacher's advice, right? We all have to test it. We all have to push those boundaries sometimes. So I do think it's okay to kind of, for me, I have to ask myself, do I trust myself as a parent that I've done a sufficient job that they're going to make a decision that's good for them?
Yeah.
And with which is scary to say because then it puts
Yeah.
it back on me, right? And then I have to go, well, either I believe that I was a good mother or that I
Mm.
did the best I could at least, or do I believe that I really screwed up and I need to do all these little band-aids? So I'm like, I'm not a band-aid girl.
Well, of course you screwed up. I mean,
Yeah,
we all
yeah,
do,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
And
parenting.
there's a
Oh,
little bit of forgiveness that needs to happen within yourself for the things that you haven't taught or that you've taught incorrectly. And hopefully, I've given my parents a lot of grace in my later years, just understanding what I've done wrong with my children. And I feel like I hope that they will give me a little bit of grace when they get older and realize, oh, this was pretty hard what my mom had to go, figure out. So, yeah.
yeah.
I know that you're very passionate about history and particularly, right now you're doing, okay, tell me where we can find you on Instagram.
Oh, okay. So Instagram, that's not a history thing, but
No?
I do an Instagram page called Quotes by Church of Jesus Christ Women. And I just quote women of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I started doing that because I like always adding women's voices wherever I can. I think women, and I mean, I spend a lot of time studying women's records in the church, and I just think these are so brilliant. I really want to share these. But you're not going to hand most people like a 6-inch thick history book, and they're going to go, "Yay, let me read that." Right. So if I can just snip it down into quotes, but also from modern leaders and really makes it so I just quote women. They're just short, just enough to give you just the spark, hopefully, of some just crystal little bit of information that maybe makes your day brighter. And so, yeah, and that's it.
Yeah. No,
So,
it's a beautiful way to send out good things. And that's a sendy thing too, is to recognize what you have and what makes you passionate and what gets you excited, what inspires you, and to share it with the world. That's really what
yeah,
we're trying to do, is take what is beautiful inside of you and get it out so that other people can see it. And that's what I love about your Instagram account. I think is just give a little bit of light and joy and hope for people
yeah.
too. So yeah.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I've always loved the way that you are a real support for women. And I know we've gotten a lot better, and hopefully the pendulum doesn't swing too far the other direction, because we need our men too, and we love
Yeah,
the men and what they
absolutely.
can do. But it's a partnership, right? So yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. And it's a beautiful partnership and yeah, and that's what I like. So I didn't start the page to disparage any other source. I just thought like whenever I give a talk, I like to not just quote men, I like to quote women as well to sort of to just I think there
balance.
needs to be balance. Yeah. And
Mhm.
because we're all beautiful intelligent beings, so let's share our
Yeah,
beautiful wisdom together. So I made it sort of as a resource to make it a little bit easier to possibly share some of the thoughts um, and yeah, so
yeah.
because it is a balance, of course, we need men. It's not about one being over the other or, better
Yeah,
or
no,
worse. It has to be partnership. Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And yeah,
So,
thank you for sharing those. They brighten my day, so
oh,
I
good. Thank you.
appreciate those. So that's great. Is there something in your life that you are still kind of is back in the back of your mind, something that you would really like to do, but maybe makes you a little bit afraid or a little terrified to do?
Oh, everything really. Um, yeah, I think I mean, I am doing the PhD now. But there is a little part of me that's afraid, like, and when I finish, what's next?
Right.
And when I get freaked out like that, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, you know?
So do you have a fear of being done?
Yeah, I think I have a fear of maybe not being able to get work, or then again, maybe getting work that um, is too much, or I don't feel the same passion for it. It's very selfish, really.
Interesting.
I'm doing the weirdest degree, but it's not weird. But so I'm doing feminist food studies. So, and I'm
Okay.
looking at more the women of the Church of Jesus Christ as my group. And with that, I've even narrowed down even more. So I look at certain aspects of what women were cooking in pioneer days, what women were cooking at the turn of the 20th century, and then I'm looking at Relief Society cookbooks and community cookbooks. So I'm looking at different aspects of that. But with my degree, it's actually a sociology doctorate, but I absolutely embrace history, sociology, anthropology, um, and just all of these different areas that really look at women's lives. And so what with food studies, you look at old recipes and you learn things. You absolutely learn things. You learn about food availability. You learn about ethnic background. You learn about what people were willing to eat, not willing to eat. Because you see when they're in modes of starvation, other things kind of creep into the diet, and those things disappear when they're out of periods of when they're starving or when they're not as well off. You see other things. You see the train bringing in foods. And so you see all these different, but then you learn the stories of them because all of a sudden you see these cookbooks and there's like, it's really fascinating with the Relief Society cookbooks. A lot of them have a lot of Mexican recipes in. Well, of course, a lot of Mormons went to Mexico when polygamy was banned because they left the country to live in polygamy. They were afraid of being chased out. And then when the Second Manifesto happened and they were able to come back into the country, they came back and they brought all these beautiful Mexican recipes. So you see these Mexican recipes, but they're not labeled as Mexican. It's just a Relief Society
It's just,
cookbook.
I love it. Yeah.
And then you go into other neighborhoods. There's this beautiful cookbook I saw out of South Africa, and there's these English recipes. There's traditional South African tribal recipes. It's just this beautiful melting pot of who is there. In each of the cookbooks, they have this beautiful personality. Um, but you can see immigration routes. You can see, well, look at the latest group of people that have immigrated this area bringing all these Italian food. So then you're getting all these Italian recipes. You're getting so you can trace immigration patterns. You can trace income sources. You can trace just so much stuff that's telling us about the lives of the women as they are working together to make their community better because they're doing the cookbooks to raise money. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of times they're doing it to raise the money for church buildings, but sometimes they were just raising the money to go out and serve in the community, to serve those who are less fortunate in the community.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're working towards that. And so I think that's, so I like with food studies, you look at that, you look at the stories the food studies are telling you about the women who are putting the food together. You look at everything from a feminist angle, like it might even be telling you and about the habits they did, the style, the tools they used tell us so much information about technology and developing scientific technology in the kitchen and what they were trying to do for health and all these other things for their children. Um,
Yeah.
so it's quite, I don't know. So it's a really, it's
That's actually really fascinating. Like, Sherrie, when you told me you were doing food studies of women, I was like, okay, so you're like just finding old recipes or
I know.
something like that. But
Yeah.
this totally makes sense. And I love it because it really helps us to understand who these people were. And I get that now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, a lot of people are like, oh, they think I'm studying like culinary arts and they're like,
Right.
oh, can you
I'm
bring
like, do you
dinner?
cook a lot? Yeah, exactly. No, this is
So,
amazing. I love it.
yeah. And
Well, and okay, and I love the part that, you talk about this being a melting pot, and this is the whole point. That I just, we've lived abroad, right? And when you travel a lot, then you recognize that there are people, everybody in the world wants the same thing. They want happiness, and they want
mhm,
happiness for their kids. And most people really want to be your friend. There are not a lot of people that, are actively going to oppose you, because we're all trying to get along together to be able to make progress in our lives. And what you're doing is a really sendy thing, because you are putting out there that, look, we are all the same and we can be a community that supports one another. And I
yeah.
absolutely love that
And
about what
discovers
you're
one
doing.
another and learns about each other so we can find these commonalities and and
Yeah.
appreciate each other. I mean, yeah, it's just it's true like the old it's from the New Testament, Acts, the book of Acts, right? Breaking bread. And it's talking about the sacrament, which is a religious connotation, but at the same time nowadays, let's break bread. What does that mean?
Get to
I
be
mean,
together.
that's
Yeah,
right. We're going
eat
to be
together.
together. We're going to be at peace. We're going to
Yeah.
break bread. We're going to discuss this. We're going to let bygones be bygones. We're going to atone. We're going to forgive. We're going to be good. We're going to break bread together. And I love
Mhm.
that. That is something that I really try to integrate with the research I do is how are they bringing together peace? How are they bringing together community as we're looking at these food sources? And
Yeah.
also how is community diminishing? Because you can also sense that in some of the resources
Yeah.
as well. So, but yeah,
We
so I
definitely
do,
need more coming together than separation, because we do get a lot of separation. That's a lot of the point of this podcast, is to bring people together and inspire people to become more and to do it together with other
yeah,
people.
yeah,
So I wanted to ask you a few rapid fire questions,
go
just to
for it.
kind of find out a little bit more about you. So my first question is, what has brought you joy in the last 24 hours?
Ooh, 24 hours. Gonna sound so corny and so simple, but I dropped my daughter off at school today and I just enjoy one-on-one simple time, right? It's not we don't have 3 hours in the car that we're trying to kill or get into anything deep. It was just like, hey, how you
Yeah.
going? Are you ready for today? I just love that one-on-one with her. I just absolutely do. I just love the
Uh,
one-on-one with my girls because they're teenagers and they don't want to hang out with me.
yes, I love the carpool. That's why I love carpool, actually,
Yeah.
because it is great. Because, well, in carpool, I get to know their friends too, which is really
Yep.
nice. But you want to just cherish those times.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the last TV show or documentary that you watched that you liked?
Ooh. I watch the weirdest stuff and it's so random. I did look into this series and it's so corny, but it's out of South Africa and it's called Recipes for Love and Murder. And it's a little, it's a little murder she wrote-ish, but the
Cute.
very dramatic too. I mean, but it's the main protagonist is a woman who also cooks a lot, and so therefore the title Recipes. And I think it's a beautiful representation of different kinds of women from different kinds of life in this little South African town, and they're working together. And just the scenery of it is just beautiful. Everything about it, the cinematography is beautiful. The showing how when she's cooking and she's chopping this fresh, beautiful fruits and vegetables, it's just it's just a beautiful, visually beautiful thing that normally I listen to things in the background as I'm doing something else, but this one was just visually beautiful to me. And
Oh, that's
yeah,
beautiful. I'll have to look that one up. Okay,
yeah.
what's the last really good book that you read?
Ooh, I really love from Betty Crocker to feminist food studies.
Great.
It's and that's the title of the book, and it's a
Okay.
selection of essays at different aspects of food studies, and it tackles racism using symbolism of food, it tackles feminism, it tackles the religious use of food, it talks about community, it just really is every time I listen to it, I can pick up something new because I've got it on audio as well as hard copy. I have all, if I like a book enough that I have all the versions, that's it. Um, but I also really liked the Polygamous Wives Writing Club. So the
Ah,
writer that put that together, she looked at the diaries of only second or third wives, and she had some
okay.
criteria for it and what they were writing about their lives. So there wasn't
Hmm.
actual writing club. That's just the way she titled it. But
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
fascinating how she's woven together what their lives were like. And I just, that was just really, it felt very personal to get to know
Yeah.
these women like that. So it was lovely.
Ah, I love that. That's great.
So two,
All
there
right.
we go.
That's awesome. Okay, name your favorite vacation spot.
Oh, the next spot, right? Anywhere.
Yeah, wherever you're going. I know.
I think, yeah,
I
family in the past was actually Cambodia. We loved
ah,
Cambodia.
never
So
been there. That
I
sounds
I
awesome.
strongly recommend it. We just had a delightful time. We loved it. We really loved Cambodia.
That's awesome. Oh,
So
very good. What's one thing you try to do every day?
Oh, Wordle.
Great. I love Wordle too. We should be friends on Wordle. We could
There we
have
go.
our,
Our
yeah,
little
that's
Wordle
awesome.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
Wordle. Yep.
Okay. What do you think I should try next?
Ooh, well, I think you're doing pretty awesome with this. Um, I think you should get published next. I think you should put together an article for somewhere, Meridian Magazine or, I mean, LDS Living, put something together and get it out there.
That's something I haven't even thought about. I don't know. So yeah, I will look
Yeah,
into that.
yeah,
Oh,
do it.
thanks,
Do it.
Sherrie. Can you tell us just quickly about your book? I know you've got to run, but can you tell us about your book that you're having published a little bit?
Yep. So it is a memoir of our experience of how we got to where we are. So it talks a little bit about our infertility trials and that path and how we were ready to kind of take the next step. And then this really bizarre situation where we ended up with these two little girls. And then also the challenges of working with children who didn't have stability and the challenges of Bruce was flying. He would fly out Monday morning and fly back home Thursday or Friday night for work. So it was me on my own. And so there is a lot of self reflection about where I was in my state of mind as I was really trying to do everything right. And it was very challenging to get passports, to get to, find the birth parents, to connect with everyone and get everything put together, and dealing with all of my own personal baggage as I did that. I had judgments of people who'd been in prison. I had judgments that I didn't know that I had judgments about, and
Mhm.
just my own processing that and just really, I hope, becoming a better person by the end of it. And so it's just our story about how we've adopted the girls.
Okay, and tell me the name of it again.
Turning Pink.
Turning Pink by Sherrie Gavin,
Yep.
and that'll be out next year then for
Yep.
people to look for.
Yep.
So,
Next
okay.
April by Common Consent Press.
Very good. Well, you'll
Awesome.
have to send me a link as soon
Will
as
do.
that comes out because I'll want to publish that for sure on my website. So,
Thank you.
thank you for being with me today, Sherrie. It was really fun to talk to you, and I hope we get to do it again soon. For everyone else, I hope you enjoyed this podcast and please subscribe. You can leave me a comment in anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and we're on YouTube as well as on sendymom.com. If you would like to be a Sendy Mom, please send me a message on sendymom.com because I just love interviewing new people that I don't know as well. And so this has been really fun today. And thank you so much, Sherrie, for being with me. And we'll sign off. So
All right.
thank
Thank you
you.
for having me.